Hey, what's up guys, Liam here, and first off, before I go into full detail into this video, I would like to say happy 10-year anniversary to Undertale, one of the greatest video games ever created. Today I'm going to be discussing my history of my opinions towards the game and why my PFP is a character from the game. When Undertale first came out 10 years ago, I was only 10 years old and a 5th grader, and I never cared for it. Looking back at it, I'm shocked, but at the same time, I'm glad I never took interest in this game at that point because it was hard for me to interpret certain things the right way and I wouldn't have been able to understand the plot well enough. There came a few instances where I tried watching playthroughs of the game, however, I found myself bored since it moved too slow to me at the time, and also because I was hearing about the popularity of a certain skeleton and memes surrounding them, which I will get into in a bit. But for the next few years or so, I didn't really think that much about Undertale until the midst of my senior year of high school, and at that point, my opinion on the game began to slowly change forever. One day, I had been searching for and watching Mario Kart Wii montages, and one in particular played a song throughout that I was not familiar with in the slightest. The song, titled Death By Glamour, truly felt like something that I hadn't heard in a long time. I got to the point that I kept watching the Mario Kart videos solely just so I could hear the song, and once I learned the song came from Undertale, my opinions at first were mixed since I knew Undertale was a widely known game, but I never cared for it since I thought it was a weird and bizarre game. But then throughout the rest of 2023, I found myself looking more into Undertale's gameplay, although I spent more time at one aspect in part than others, and that being the boss fight of Metatani X, because that was where Death by Glamour would play, and that song had become one of my favorites to listen to in a flash. More of the gameplay would attract my attention once I truly read the story of the game, and as such, I listened to more of the soundtrack and more songs, which I came to like, such as Ruins, Home, Bone Trussel, Temmie Village, Spear of Justice, Spider Dance, It's Raining Somewhere Else, Asgore, Hopes and Dreams, Save the World, and Respite, to name a few. I could go on forever, but the ones I've mentioned above, along with Death by Glamour, are among my favorite ones I've listened to in the soundtrack. I liked knowing that some of the songs also had inspiration from some previous games, like Touhou Project, which of course has its fair share of goated songs. The main characters in the game I liked as well, specifically with how their stories were written. The first major character worth mentioning is Flowey, aka Azrael Dreamer, the deceased child of Toriel and Asgore. When a human fell into the underground, Azrael took them in and became part of their family. It seemed like everything was wonderful until one day the human began dying from illness, so Azrael took the human soul to the surface, where the people the human lived with before falsely believed that Azrael had killed the human and proceeded to brutally attack him, which resulted in him dying in the underground from his injuries after he returned. But his story was far from over, because Alphys, the royal scientist, had begun experimenting with determination, the power for a soul to persist after dying, and used it to inject some yellow flowers, which, due to Azrael's dust falling onto after dying, had unknowingly reincarnated him into a flower named Flowey. But things only got worse, however, when he wasn't able to experience any happy emotion like love, hope, or compassion due to him not having a soul, and as such, he resorted to a personality that could be described, in my opinion, as malicious and psychopathic, going by a kill or be killed philosophy. In the neutral ending, Flowey is fought as the final boss, which people often call Omega Flowey, but in the pacifist story, he appears at the end to absorb every soul in the underground and become his true form of Azrael Dreamer, but with a much more nightmarish appearance and with the title of the God of Hyper Death. After pacifying Azrael, he reverts to his original form and destroys the barrier, but because the souls weren't in him anymore, he couldn't maintain his appearance and reverts back to Flowey after bidding the human goodbye and after being comforted by them. Another story that hit me hard was Toriel's story, the first time I read it, seeing how she wanted to keep the protagonist safe from the dangers and hazards throughout the underground, and how she was alone following Asgore's decision to hunt down every human he could to get the souls needed to break out of the underground in order to cross the barrier. And when Toriel fights the human, she was only trying to keep them from suffering a similar fate as 6 other humans who have died. I can really feel for Toriel's sadness when you reach the part of leaving the ruins, since she's just a motherly figure trying to give the protagonist a good life and keep you from being killed by Asgore, but also due to having lost her children, Azrael and the other fallen human. It's also worth noting that it's even more sad that if you're in a neutral route, no matter if you spare her or not, you never see her again, even if you get the ending, which is a pacifist neutral ending, with all the monsters living without conflict, since Toriel is such a relatable character to some people. Another character I liked was Papyrus. I liked his funny, quirky, and odd personality, and I'm gonna be honest and say that most of, if not all of his dialogue made me die in a funny way. His story of wanting to capture the protagonist so that he can join the Royal Guard and prove himself to his friend who leads it was cool, but even then, he truly doesn't wish to kill the human, believing that everyone can be nice and make friends with one another. And depending on the player's actions, Papyrus can become your friend and be called on phone almost anywhere afterwards, which I thought was really cool. His highly optimistic approach and feelings and fact that he is selfless makes you feel for him because he desperately wants to make friends with as many people as he can, and he'll do anything it takes. Papyrus's relationship with another character, which I will get into later on, I also liked, since even though they may seem like they don't care about him, they actually do care for him very deeply, and they get angered if you kill him. Undyne was another favorite of mine when I read her story, because when you first see her, she is a relentless hunter trying to defeat and capture the protagonist along with their soul to fulfill Asgore's plan of crossing the barrier. But then after running away from her numerous times and fighting her, this part of the game becomes one of the most crucial parts on any route because she's one of the biggest parts in the whole story. The protagonist has the difficult choice of letting Undyne die or live in Hotland, and she becomes important in fulfilling the pacifist route, not just by letting her live, but also by befriending her in order to progress to the date with Alphys, which then leads the protagonist into the true lab part, because you also cannot befriend her if you kill anyone before that, so it's best to not kill anybody before meeting Undyne. While she may seem like someone who is malicious towards humans, she truly does have a heart deep down to be friends with people. I was also fascinated reading about Undyne's relationship with Alphys as well, because it's nice when some form of media can depict an LGBTQ relationship between two characters, especially if the couple is lesbian. Undyne's death was also the one that hit me the hardest, seeing her melt away in both the neutral and genocide runs after her attempts of persisting with her determination. Her fight in the genocide run, pretty crazy. I think Battle Against a True Hero really fits in with Undyne trying her best to protect her people as a savior, and even if death is truly imminent, it's a great final stand from her, and that song is one of the only songs ever, I will admit, that has made me cry, and I'm getting emotional even thinking about that fight and song as I speak. Thinking about just what I've lost in life, like what Undyne has lost with her friends. This song also makes me tear up due to how fast I've grown up, despite only being 20 years old at the time of this video coming out. Parts of it also even remind me of my overall favorite song of all time, especially the final 40 seconds or so. While I may not be into it, I also appreciate the inspiration of anime behind Undyne's character, which are obvious throughout. As for Alphys, I wasn't that fond of her character compared to the others I've mentioned before, but I have come to respect her thanks to her trying to be more confident in her job as the royal scientist after the determination experiments failed. When they failed, resulting in the creation of the Amalgamates, terrifying monsters fused together from monsters that were dying due to their bodies not being able to handle determination, Alphys began to lie to everyone about the results and became scared of her reputation being ruined if the truth ever came out. Seeing this part of the story changed my whole opinion on Alphys, since I can relate in a way. When I was younger, I thought that I could make everything hard go away like schoolwork by not doing it and not telling the truth, but things only went wrong for me, and at that point I realized that I can't do work I'm incapable of without seeking assistance, as well as just flat out ignoring stuff which I thought was too difficult. And that's what Alphys does by running from her problems. To add to this, she comes up with the story of Metaton being a robot who has gone rogue against his programming and conspires with him to make her appear to the protagonist as their guide and hero, so that she can keep her reputation intact. She also contemplates whether she should even be alive or not because of her actions and lies, and depending on the ending, she might take her life depending on the actions of the player. Her self-esteem carries over if the ending is more happy, especially in Pacifist, when she and Undyne finally admit how much they like each other romantically. For Metaton, I thought he was cool, the premise of him being the only celebrity of the underground and having high amounts of fame, which in his eyes was not enough. He wanted more than he already had by trying to cross the barrier and become a celebrity amongst mankind, and depending on the ending, he sees just how much he truly means to all the monsters of the underground, realizing that without him, their world wouldn't have any entertainment. I also thought his boss fight was really cool, as it differed from other enemies in the sense that you had to raise ratings to a certain standard, and I liked that take. I also loved his origin story about how he was once a ghost living next to Napstablook in Waterfall, his cousin, until one day he met Alphys and gave her a body to design for him, which he eventually possessed to become what he was when you first see him in the game. All he ever wanted was to entertain monsters and humans alike. He never wanted to harm humans, but was only acting as part of Alfie's plan to make her appear as a hero to him and to her people. And last but simply not least, Asgore, the King of the Underground. Not amongst my favorite characters, but his story, like most of the other main characters, can leave some form of impact. He's not an inherently evil character, but his actions of declaring war on humanity drive from losing both Azrael and the adapted human in a flash, and as such, he killed 6 humans who enter the underground, seeking to gather enough souls to destroy the barrier, which traps all monsters in the underground. He essentially is like a broken man who has lost what he likes in life, such as his children and Toriel, who immediately left him once he became what he was. All he wanted was for his people to be happy, and in the end, his action caused regret and grief to himself and from his people having to live in despair. The characters in this game have really touched me, and I'm glad that they've been a key factor in this game's impact across the internet over the last decade. This brings me to the part of the video also where I will talk about the question people I imagine have already been asking me: why have I not talked about Sans yet? My opinions on Sans, no offense to the community, are mixed. I understand how and why people often say that Sans is their favorite and he's arguably the most popular character in the game. His laid-back, mysterious, and comedic personality, as well as his constant usage of fourth wall breaks, can really bring forth an audience. If I'm being honest, I really do like his character, and I think he's funny to an extent. But what sets me back, however, are the amount of memes that are spawned and spread around Sans. This is also one reason why I was never interested in stuff related to the game when I was younger, because I found Sans to be a weird and bizarre character that I couldn't understand just how much of a cultural icon he is. And I'm not that fond of seeing just how he overshadows most of the characters from people's perspectives, and people always shipping him off with other characters. His songs are interesting, and some of you are probably already hating for seeing that I haven't even brought it up yet, but I will now, that Megalovania is not amongst my favorite songs in the game. I have listened to it in the past and a few times recently, and I understand why people like this song, along with Sans' fight at the end of Genocide, but I personally think this song is an extremely overplayed one. It's really cool, don't get me wrong, but I like to hear other songs too, and not just the one that's become an insane phenomenon over a 10-year span. I'm glad it's popular, but I hate to say it that unfortunately the memes around Sans are the biggest reason why he is not my favorite character, but that does not mean he is my least favorite character in the game. He's probably around the middle for me, and I do respect his popularity and those who have their opinions on him. I just wish he was memed on a bit less, and I'm also saying this to show that I'm not some crazy fanatic who is madly obsessed with one character due to all the memes that spread around him across the internet. There is one thing that I did like about Sans, though, and that being that he cares for everyone in the underground, Papyrus especially, because while it may seem like he's just a laid-back guy who likes to sit around telling jokes, slacking, and appearing whatever, teleporting and all that stuff, he legitimately cares for the welfare of his people and wants his people to peacefully be freed from being trapped. I felt more touched in the neutral and pacifist runs where he tells the story of how he bonded with Toriel over jokes and puns, and due to him being a sentry on the other side of the door from the ruins in Snowdin, and Toriel telling Sans to promise her to look after humans and protect them should they exit the ruins, showing that he tries to care for them the best way he can. My preferences overall are just different, and that's why characters such as Undyne and Metatani X I like more than Sans, which is also what I was just about to get into detail on. So for roughly a year or so after I made my YouTube account, I hadn't made a PFP after being unable to decide on an image. Around the same time, however, I was starting to get more into the Undertale matter, and by the time spring rolled around, I decided because I like Death by Glamour so much, and because I'm not like a lot of people who are into this game, I decided I would go with Metatani X as a way of showing people that I am different. The next thing I would like to get into is how Undertale was inspired by numerous famous games from before, such as Earthbound and Touhou Project, with the way that your character moves around and graphics being similar to Earthbound, and some of the songs as well as the enemy encounters that give vibes that Touhou would give, like the bullet hell style element and the small space where you would avoid attacks from the enemies, and some enemies being harder to fight than others, such as Undyne, Muffet, and Asgore. The puzzle solving mechanic in this game also impressed me, seeing how you had to learn to progress throughout, and watching people trying to know how to solve them kept me engaged. And whether the puzzles are hard or not, they can really keep you interested in seeing what else might come as the game ensues. Now, what I think is the biggest and most important takeaway from this game, however, is how the player's actions and how they control the protagonist affect what happens in the game through the game of strategy element. Say if you make friends with the monsters, the ending turns more positive, whereas if you kill the monsters and make them die, then the ending gets more dark. It's like a real life scenario for all humans where if you do more things that are good, people will view you better, but if you do bad things, people will view you more horribly. I'm one to personally prefer the pacifist or neutral routes, the ones that involve less killing over the genocide, since the way that some of these monsters die saddened me. And for someone who normally doesn't get strongly emotional, these parts of the game, looking at it, triggered that emotion in a flash. This game can truly make you feel grateful or guilty, depending on your actions you do to the monsters you interact with. I'm almost at the end, so I think it's worth noting how high of an impact this game really has had since 2015, and even though I didn't think much of it at all in the first place until a few years ago, I have come to appreciate what it has provided, whether it be sad stories, characters who are trying to satisfy their own needs, or songs inspired by previous games. I'm not going to get into theories or fan projects of this game since I don't really care for that kind of stuff, but if other people are into that, I can respect them for what they like. Now, the last thing I'm going to say before I end this video is I'm going to admit a very dark secret that many of you are probably going to hate me for afterwards, and that being, I have never played this game before, and now that I've said it, you guys can hate me for as much as you'd like, but for someone who also doesn't even play video games anymore, like I used to, I'm sorry. But I will say this, may Toby Fox continue to spread his legacy around the world for generations to come. I hope you've enjoyed my story, and I will see you guys later on, and if you guys want to comment down below, feel free to, I will respond.